The pink envelope slid across the breakfast bar like a paper guillotine, my name. Marina Russell, 25, blazing in block capitals. Dad's voice stayed almost cheerful as he refilled his coffee. Just the basics of adulthood. I peeled the flap. Inside waited an invoice for $1,050 room fee, utilities, and a friendly note that any delay triggered a $40 penalty. Across the living room archway, my brother Eli, 22, lounged with a gaming headset and a grin. Mom murmured that Eli was still finding his path, while I, with 2 stable jobs, needed to carry my weight. Those jobs, Harborview dental receptionist, 8 to 4 dockside grill shift, lead 6 to midnight. 4 nights a week were stable, only the way a rickety bridge is technically standing. I nodded, throat dry. The first payment was due next Monday, and Dad's tone made the date feel carved in stone. Next dawn, I unlocked Harborview before sunrise, palms numb on the alarm keypad. Yasmin, my coworker, pressed a steaming chai into my hands and studied my face. I waved the invoice. Parents, charging me to sleep in my old bedroom while Eli lives like royalty. She whistled. That's more than my apartment. I tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. My bank app confirmed the ugly math. Once rent, fuel, and student loan minimums cleared, I would keep $19 a week if no tire blew and no tooth ached. That night at Dockside tips were thin and customers cranky. On break, I scrolled my credit card activity to distract myself and found a string of foreign charges, digital coins, streaming upgrades, tiny purchases that together equaled my water bill. The account holder's handle, EliRaptor88, glowed on every line. He had piggybacked my saved card again. At 1 a.m., wired and exhausted, I opened a fresh email, applied for a high-yield online savings account, and christened the hidden ledger Project Coral. 10% of every paycheck would dive discreetly into that reef. Then I screenshot every injustice, the invoice the game charges, Mom's gentle guilt texts, Eli's cash requests. I labeled the folder Receipts of Oblivion. A week later, I laid the first rent envelope, cash no check, into Dad's palm. He tucked it into his blazer, without counting. Discipline builds character. Eli, wearing brand new sneakers, strolled past. Sis, can you spot me 30 for gas? I'll pay you back Friday. Sorry, I answered, voice like glass. New budget. Ask Dad. Mom gasped as if I'd cursed. Family helps family, she scolded. You're right, I said, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. 6 months blurred into a life of ghostly repetition. Extra host shifts, double weekends, skipped lunches. Harborview's break room grew used to my protein bars and power naps. Tip after tip funneled into Coral, $1,600 by month. 2, $4,000 by month 3. Dad raised utilities by 50 due to climate control. And Eli installed a third monitor. Late summer heat fried the AC. Mom tacked a repair surcharge onto my bill, and Eli hosted a LAN party. I stopped opening social media. Engagement photos and beach trips slid past unseen. One Tuesday evening, Harborview's delivery driver, Trevor, waited while I locked up. He eyed my sunken cheeks. You're burning out. What's the end game? 2 years. I shrugged. Maybe less. Enough to buy my own air. He handed me a flyer for closed bungalows auction, next quarter cash walks, in faster than loans. Impossible, I said. Not with receipts, he replied, nodding at my phone. November arrived with pumpkin pie and an overheard bombshell Mom let slip that Dad was 3 mortgage payments behind. At Thanksgiving, Dad presented a fresh envelope, rent rising to $1,200 because inflation. My fork hovered over mashed potatoes. Eli's share. He waved the idea away. Your brother's still in discovery mode. Eli grinned, mouth full of turkey. I memorized the scene and added every detail to Receipts of Oblivion. Coral ticked past 10,000 that night, and I celebrated by fixing my cracked phone screen with a $25 kit while binging DIY house flip videos until dawn. December hammered our town with icy winds that ballooned the power bill. Dad slapped another 60 onto utilities. I merely logged the figure. One closing shift, a tray slipped, and plates shattered at my feet. I stared at the shards, ears buzzing, and finally cried quiet, shoulder-shaking sobs. Chef Luis found me swept glass and sent me home with gentle eyes. Home meant darkness, except the TV glow, Eli snoring amid 2 fresh pizza boxes paid with my card. I canceled the card on the spot and texted him one word, no. He responded with question marks. I watched Coral announce 23,000 and climbed into bed without replying. January's blizzard slammed salt against every window and every nerve. Mom greeted me with invoices for water filter replacement and lawnmower maintenance house costs we share. Equal shares, I asked. Proportional to income, Dad corrected. Eli stomped downstairs, furious about his canceled card. My campaign launches tonight. Proportional to income, I repeated, retreating upstairs before the thunderclap. Coral shone with 31,000 by early February auction day 3 weeks away. Trevor's realtor friend Megan met me after Dockside closed. We sat in a neon flickering diner booth. I slid her a flash drive proof of funds crisp and zipped. She lifted an eyebrow. Where'd someone your age get 30 grand in cash by paying rent? She laughed once, then grew serious. Cash buyers move silent. Form an LLC, route the mail to my office, and no one needs to know you own it. I signed preliminary paperwork, hand trembling. The next days blurred into a countdown. Yasmin ferried boxes of my childhood to a storage unit, her car a silent accomplice. At home, walls emptied one picture at a time, my absence disguised as clutter control. Mom added a winter insulation fee. I simply nodded. Eli's streamer followers hit 50,000. He bought celebratory LED panels. Coral finally displayed 35,400. Auction morning began slick with fog. I wore a thrift store blazer and clutched a cashier's check. 40 minutes later, 131 Willow Lane belonged to C-Star Holdings, LLC, me, free and clear. I signed, paid, and left the courthouse dizzy with disbelief. That evening, Yasmin and Trevor helped load the car. Dad was playing poker at the club. Mom thought I was at work. Eli live-streamed a tournament. Nobody saw the boxes disappear. At midnight, I unfurled a sleeping bag on Willow Lane's hardwood, listened to the hum of a refrigerator older than I was, and exhaled. For the first time since a pink envelope landed like a guillotine, I owed rent to no one. Tomorrow I would leave 4 letters on my stripped mattress, each envelope labeled "Open when ready," each stuffed with spreadsheets, invoices, timelines, and a single line in my neatest handwriting. When family helps family, everyone pays their fair share. I rolled onto my back, stared at a cracked ceiling, and laughed. Quiet relieved a sound as fragile as it was fierce. Rent was due in 2 weeks, but not for me. The landlord had finally moved out. The sunrise through my own kitchen window looked nothing like the filtered dawn at my parents' place. Here on Willow Lane, the light poured unobstructed gold and self-assured, settling over second-hand cabinets and dust motes that belonged to me alone. I rinsed a chipped mug, stirred instant coffee, and nearly laughed when I remembered I had nobody to justify the electricity usage to. The letters on my abandoned mattress must have been opened by now. My phone, a new prepaid number. Only 3 people knew, remained mercifully silent. I drove to Harborview with the windows down, wind whipping my ponytail, unfamiliar songs on the radio, because I'd finally canceled the streaming plans Eli once hijacked. Yasmin spotted the change before I'd hung up my coat. "You look rested for the first time since I met you," she whispered while booting up her workstation. I shrugged, smiling. Turns out sleeping without a price tag taped to your forehead is restorative. At lunch, Trevor texted a photo, Dad's SUV idling in Harborview's parking lot. Apparently, the home office line had given him my workplace schedule. I left through the back alley, heart-pounding, feeling half guilty and half exhilarated, like a teenager skipping class. That evening, I found a 4-minute voicemail on the prepaid mom's voice, shaking between anger and panic. Words like irresponsible betrayal, family legacy. I saved the file to Receipts of Oblivion and blocked the number. Sleep came easy. 2 days later, Megan handed me a manila folder at the diner. C-Star Holdings is official. Mailbox at my office ready. Utilities switched. Pay the annual fee on time, and your name stays buried. She tapped a page showing a modest balance in a repair fund we'd built into the closing costs. Next step is safety net. You're 1 flat tire away from chaos. I nodded already, planning double shifts for the next fortnight. At Dockside, we rolled through spring break crowds. Tips soared. Every wrinkled bill joined the safety net envelope labeled Coral 2. When the last tourist bus pulled out, I had 1,400 tucked behind my pantry flower, and the bruises on my shins from tray corners were turning yellow instead of purple. The house, however, required attention. The roof sighed with every gust. The porch slanted like a drunk forgetting where level was. I spent Sundays watching tutorial videos, then tackled repairs with borrowed tools. Wood shavings under fingernails felt honest. One afternoon, I was halfway through restaining floorboards when an unfamiliar sedan crawled past, slowed, and stopped. Eli climbed out, looking smaller than I remembered, hoodie sleeves hiding restless hands. He stayed on the sidewalk. "I'm not here to fight," he called. "Mom's losing it. Dad's talking about borrowing against the house. He says it's your fault." I set down the brush. "Dad hasn't paid his lender for months. That's on him." Eli kicked a pebble. "They miss you, you know." I raised an eyebrow. We both understood miss equaled need. "Did you come for money?" He swallowed. "I came to see if you're alive, and maybe say I'm sorry." The sincerity in his eyes unsettled me more than anger would have. I walked to the porch rail, wiping stain from my wrists. "You want coffee?" He nodded. Inside, he perched on a folding chair, studying the ragtag furniture. "This place is rough." "This place is mine," I answered gently, and poured instant coffee into mismatched mugs. He blew on the surface. "I just thought everything was fine back home. Mom made it sound like you liked helping." I nearly choked. "You're old enough to read an invoice, Eli." Silence throbbed. At length, he said, "I got a temporary job stocking at the grocery. Pays nothing, but I'm trying." I believed him, and that surprised me. When he left, I felt lighter, though nothing was resolved. A week later, Harborview slashed hours. New dental software replaced 2 front desk shifts. Yasmin hugged me. I filed for partial unemployment and hustled extra nights at dockside. The safety net slowed but didn't drain. Meanwhile, Dad's lender filed pre-foreclosure. Megan forwarded me the public notice with a one-line question. "Ready." I reread the document, pulse steady. We'd discussed this scenario months ago. C-Star could purchase the defaulted note for pennies, become the new creditor, and either renegotiate or collect. Cold may be. But also textbook finance the game they chose first. I emailed Megan Proceed. Days later, she confirmed note acquired. A casual search would reveal only an anonymous LLC, now held the fate of 17 Maple Ridge. I waited. The reaction arrived Thursday evening. My prepaid lit up with an unknown number. I let it ring into voicemail. Dad's baritone erupted. "Some shell company is threatening us. If you know anything, call me." I saved the clip. Friday morning, he showed up at Harborview again. This time, the security guard escorted him out. He left a letter on the reception desk, handwritten smudged, calling me ungrateful warning that blood ties are forever. I stuffed it beneath the dental shredder once he was gone. Yasmin cheered softly. On Willow Lane, spring, unfurled wisteria draped the fence. I planted basil in chipped mugs. Nights carried the scent of something clean, hope or possibility. Maybe both. Yet peace didn't equal purpose. Receiving rent once owed felt hollow. I wanted direction beyond vengeance. One quiet midnight shift, Luis watched me sketch menu, redesign ideas on napkins. "You missed your calling," he said. "Graphic design, art presentation atmosphere. You see stories in empty space." The words clung. I reopened an old laptop, dusted off my college portfolio, built a small web page offering affordable branding. First client, a neighbor launching a pet-sitting side gig. Payment arrived by Venmo. I framed the receipt on my fridge. Business dripped in slowly enough to spark, but not overwhelm. Then came the knock that signaled Act 2. A process server delivered an envelope addressed to C-Star Holdings at Willow Lane. My parents had hired a lawyer, alleging predatory lending practices by the mysterious creditor. I paced the living room, heart racing. Until reason reasserted itself. Every figure, every email, every timestamp favored me. Their own neglect birthed the default. Megan confirmed the same after scanning the suit. Weak. They'll withdraw once they realize discovery means opening their books. Still, court documents meant escalation. I drafted a letter to Maple Ridge occupants, formal yet polite loan reinstatement amount deadline contact. No threats, no venom, just math. I mailed it, certified signature required. 3 days later, Mom called from a borrowed phone I didn't recognize. Against better judgment, I answered. Her voice cracked. "Marina, please, we can't pay this." "What do you want?" I pictured interest statements, overlaying memories of childhood lunches she'd packed with little smiley faces drawn on napkins. People contain multitudes. "I want accountability," I said. "Start with a plan that doesn't rely on me bleeding." She whispered, "Can we meet?" I set terms: public cafe, daylight, no surprise guests. She agreed. Sunday afternoon, we sat by the window of Bean and Leaf, where I once did calculus homework. She looked tired, streaks of gray threading her perfect blowout. "Your father thought the market would bounce back." She began stirring untouched tea. "He kept refinancing, covering Eli's tuition, the new roof, our credit cards. We planned to refinance again before rates rose." I folded my hands. "Instead, you refinanced through your daughter's paychecks." Tears welled. She didn't deny it. She slid a folder across the table, a rough budget handwritten. Noting cuts, selling Dad's golf membership, listing the SUV, Eli contributing $200 a month. I skimmed the numbers. They didn't add up yet. They pointed somewhere new reality. "This is a start," I admitted. Mom exhaled shakily. "You own the loan, right? Reduce the penalties. Let us stabilize. I'll sign anything." I considered. Power dynamics felt warped. Offering lenience risked repeating history. But refusal might cement spite. Compromise. I proposed interest-only payments for 6 months at market rent, equivalent, audited each quarter by an accountant of my choosing, Yasmin's cousin, impartial. If they missed one payment, full, balance accelerated. Mom agreed. We shook hands, adult to adult. Outside drizzle softened the streetlights. I walked home under an umbrella that smelled like cedar and dish soap, wondering if closure tasted more like kindness than triumph. Life simplified after that. Checks arrived on time, small but steady. I logged them, allocated half to Coral 2, half toward house projects. The porch straightened. A thrift store sofa filled the living room, bright mustard yellow, ridiculously cheerful. Clients trickled into my art side hustle. Trevor needed a logo for his delivery business. Luis asked for a menu redesign. Even Yasmin commissioned custom invitations for her sister's wedding. Every completed project stitched confidence into the tapestry of my days. One June night, Eli texted a selfie in a stockroom wearing a name tag. Caption, not glamorous, but mine. I replied, proud of you, no sarcasm. He asked if I could proofread his community college application essay. I said yes, then cried a little because the request felt pure. Early July. Megan called C-Star shows healthy cash, negligible liabilities. Lenders love that. Ready to prospect second property. My impulse was no, I wanted breathing room, but opportunity whispered. I drove to the beach toes in cool sand, seagulls squabbling, and weighed ambition against rest. For once, ambition didn't wear chains. It looked like possibility, like building something rather than escaping something. I rang Megan back. Let's scout slowly. The same evening, Dad sent an email, a handwritten note, scanned crooked words careful. Thank you for the chance. Payment enclosed, plan on track. No mention of blame. I drank ginger tea at my own table and let forgiveness hover nearby, not invited fully in, but no longer locked out. Summer marched on cicadas humming. Dockside promoted me to weekend floor manager. Fewer late nights, stable salary. I turned the art gig into LLC number 2 Blue Current Creative, a sister to C-Star. Business license pinned to the wall beside a watercolor of Willow Lane I'd painted during golden hour, the porch now proud and level. One August morning, a letter arrived from Joseph Bank and Trust, pre-approved small business line for Blue Current limit, modest but significant. I placed the offer atop the fridge, magnetized by a seashell clip, and whispered to 18-year-old me cramped over scholarship forms that we made it. I still vacuumed thrift store rugs and ate discount vegetables, yet dignity flavored every routine. Receipts of oblivion remained on my hard drive. I opened it less and less. Some nights I added new files labeled Gratitude's Yasmin's Laugh. When I perfected her invite, Trevor's delivery van sporting my decal, Eli's message saying he passed math with a B, thanks to my tutoring. These files counterweighted the darkness. On the equinox, I hosted a backyard meal, Yasmin Trevor Luis. Even Eli, he left by 9 to rest before dawn shift. We ate grilled corn, laughed about Harborview gossip, watched string lights flicker. I told them the whole saga. It spilled out like river water finding ocean. Nobody judged. Everyone toasted to surviving. When dishes were washed and guests departed, I sat on the steps inhaling night-blooming jasmine, realizing vengeance had quietly shape-shifted into reclamation. I still intended to enforce the loan if payments faltered, but not from spite, rather from healthy boundaries. The power no longer thrilled. It simply existed a tool to protect my equilibrium. I emailed Megan at midnight. Let's pause new acquisitions until next year. I'm renovating inner space first. She replied with a smiley emoji and a note about balance. In bed, I scrolled far enough back to the day the pink envelope slid across the breakfast bar. The memory felt like reading a biography of someone I used to know. I powered down the phone, darkness settling soft. Tomorrow I would rise, brew coffee in my own chipped mug, and sketch a mural concept for the cafe down the street. Rent would still be due at Maple Ridge. Invoices would still track realities, but my identity no longer orbited their acceptance or their neglect. I closed my eyes, heart-steady mind drafting color palettes. Part of me wondered what story might unfold next, but for the first time, the wondering was laced with genuine curiosity instead of dread. Autumn melted into winter with the quiet certainty of tides, and Willow Lane adjusted its voice to match floorboards, creaking deeper under cold evenings, kettle hissing louder against wet wind. Yet inside the rhythm of my days felt balanced for the first time in years. 3 mornings a week at Dockside as floor manager. Afternoons shaping logos under blue current. Creative nights sketching cafe murals by lamplight, while basil dried in small mason jars above the stove. Checks from Maple Ridge kept arriving on time, each endorsed in a handwriting that tried to stay steady, and every deposit triggered the same 2-step ritual, half to Coral 2, half to a renovation envelope, taped inside the pantry behind old tea bags. By December, that envelope bulged enough to consider the crumbling bathroom tiles more than an aesthetic concern. So I spent a Friday evening watching grouting tutorials and a Saturday hunched over porcelain scraping, leveling, reminding myself that ownership is equal parts freedom and sore wrists. Sunday morning, Leonora Barnes, owner of Bean and Leaf, called to confirm she loved my pastel concept for her shop wall and asked whether I could paint after closing on weekdays. She wanted to unveil the redesign at the town's Winter Lights Festival in 6 weeks. I accepted before doubt could glance up from the spreadsheet. That same afternoon, Eli arrived unannounced, a textbook under one arm, grocery receipts under the other, and the jittery energy of someone terrified he might disappoint. He explained he had to build a budgeting case study for his Intro to Business course and wondered if I would review his math. We spread his notes across the kitchen table, and within 10 minutes, redirected half his spending from energy drinks to a modest emergency fund. He left with fresh basil, tied in twine, and eyes brighter than when he'd knocked. The following week, Megan sent a link to a commercial foreclosure, a brick storefront downtown square. Bones, tall windows, water damage, laughably low starting bid. She teased picture blue currant painted on that facade, but added no pressure. I opened the listing nightly, imagining gallery nights, workshop, mornings, walls, singing with local artists' work, yet closed the tab each time, reminding myself I had promised to pause acquisitions until mentally settled. 2 days before Christmas, Dad's payment arrived late for the first time. Enclosed was a note explaining a contract job had fallen through and requesting a 1-week grace period. Old reflexes urged immediate confrontation, but newer muscles suggested conversation. I drafted a concise reply extension, granted no penalty, next due date firm. On New Year's Eve, I finished the Bean and Leaf mural, steam-swirled coffee cups morphing into constellations, and Leonora insisted I join her staff for the midnight countdown. We toasted with sparkling cider in ceramic mugs. She paid early and slipped an extra $100 into the envelope for magic. Walking home through drifting snow, I caught my reflection in dark storefronts, paint-smudged jeans, scarf knit by Yasmin posture, neither defensive nor sagging, simply alive. Thick flakes softened street lamps, while a rare thought surfaced. I was happy. January tested that claim immediately. Dockside's owner revealed the building had been sold. The restaurant would relocate in spring, reducing staff beforehand. My guaranteed hours vanished overnight, replaced by on-call uncertainty. Panic strobed but didn't consume me. Coral 2 existed for this reason. I widened Blue Current's marketing net posting process videos, offering bundle discounts. Clients appeared a yoga studio wanting rebrand, a mechanic craving social media banners, a high school theater director needing posters. Each project proved creativity could buy groceries. One icy morning, Dad called from the hospital. He'd slipped on black ice, fractured his wrist, sidelined from construction work for 6 weeks. Insurance covered most, but income froze. He sounded embarrassed, pain meds flattening the edges of his pride. I visited that evening, bouquet of budget tulips in hand, and found Mom rubbing lotion onto his uninjured hand, exhaustion shadowing her jaw. We spoke soft logistics, temporary disability paperwork, payment schedule, restructuring. Eli contributing more. I offered to draft the revised plan and left with no bitterness gnawing my ribs, only a sober respect for how quickly any family can tilt. On the walk to the car, snowflakes felt gentler than I remembered from childhood. February delivered a letter from the Small Business Development Council awarding Blue Current a micro-grant for women-owned startups. Leonora had written an unsolicited recommendation, citing the mural's community impact. The grant wasn't huge, but it matched almost exactly the down payment required for that brick storefront downtown. I reopened the listing. The auction was set for March 1st. I spent 2 nights curve-fitting numbers, forecasting worst-case cash flows, then sat on the living room floor with Megan's voicemail icon blinking. I listened twice before calling back and saying yes. March arrived like a percussion line, each day a drumbeat paint at Bean and Leaf until close review. Eli's midterm draft, finalize yoga logo, send Maple Ridge, invoice practice, auction paddle, raise in the bathroom mirror. Auction day I wore the same thrift store blazer that bagged Willow Lane, except this time my hands didn't tremble. Bidding started low. Competition came from a property flipper with impatience in his tapping foot. When his maximum stalled $200,000 below my ceiling, the gavel cracked, and Blue Current Creative Studio became reality. I thanked him politely on the courthouse steps. He scowled, unaware courtesy itself was currency. Renovation required sweat and community. Trevor donated leftover plywood, Yasmin's fiancé wired new lighting. At labor cost, Louis brought end-of-shift soups to keep volunteers warm. I painted walls between design deadlines, learning to switch from digital layers to literal ones of primer. Every evening, I recorded bills, cross-checking them against a schedule that still included Maple Ridge receipts trickling in on time, even with Dad's wrist in a brace. The symmetry sometimes felt surreal. One blustery afternoon, I found Mom waiting outside the studio carrying a shoebox. She handed it over without preamble. Inside sat every invoice I had ever paid them, sorted chronologically, each stamped paid in bold red letters. She said they'd been clearing closets for a more minimalist life and believed I should decide the paper's fate. The gesture pierced me deeper than apology. I stored the box under my drafting table, undecided. April's ribbon cutting drew local reporters. Leonora catered pastries shaped like paint palettes. Eli volunteered as usher, wearing a crisp shirt bought with his own paycheck. Dad attended in a sling, proud but understated. When the mayor thanked Blue Current for revitalizing a neglected block, I watched my parents exchange a glance that held pride unclouded by possession. After guests trickled out, I stood alone amid fresh drywall scent and listened to the building's silence, a richer quiet than Willow Lane's, because it included echoes of hustle and laughter. That night, I carried the shoebox to my backyard fire pit. One by one, invoices curled into ash, their red stamps turning ember orange before drifting skyward. I kept only the first pink envelope smoothed flat in a sketchbook's pocket, a relic not of debt but of origin. Summer rolled forward with its own metronome client meetings, mural workshops for teens, morning jogs with Eli, who discovered exercise eased study stress. Dad's wrist healed. He accepted lighter supervisory work, admitting ladders scared him now. Mom started a micro bakery out of their apartment kitchen, Leonora selling her cinnamon knots at Bean and Leaf on consignment. Payments to C-Star continued, but eventually they asked to refinance with a credit union under their own names. I agreed, smiling when the final wire came through. C-Star's ledger zeroed out the Maple Ridge line, nothing owed, nothing pending. We met to sign release papers in the very cafe where the budget folder first slid across the table. Mom joked she could exhale for the first time in 3 years. Dad squeezed her hand instead of checking his phone. On the walk back to my car, I realized the cycle had closed not with revenge, but with restoration and boundaries intact. Autumn approached again, and with it, Harborview Dental's annual charity gala. Yasmin convinced me to donate a mural voucher for auction. Bids skyrocketed, raising more for free clinics than any dental floss raffle ever could. I walked home under amber trees, thinking of cycles, how pain can mutate into power, how power can transmute into generosity, how generosity can seed a community. At Willow Lane, the porch light flickered. I replaced the bulb before bed and stared a long time at the glow pooling over newly planted marigolds. A text pinged Eli audit reporting he'd aced it intro to business. Next plan transfer to a state university, maybe major in accounting. I replied with a stream of celebration emojis, set the phone down, and drafted a scholarship fund idea on scrap paper titled Coral Legacy. Outside autumn wind rustled basil stalks left to seed, and I thought how fitting that even tired plants can scatter new beginnings into ground they'll never personally bloom in, and how once in a while, if we pay our own rent to life on time, that ground might be ours too. First frost touched the windows on Willow Lane before dawn, tracing silver rivers across the glass, while the house kept its steady hum warm and earnest. I woke before the kettle clicked, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the hush that arrives when a new season is still deciding how loud it wants to be. The smell of dried basil lingered from last night's batch, and somewhere in the hallway, the shoebox of ashes. What tiny scraps of invoice fragments hadn't turned to smoke rested untouched proof that memories can be contained without being dusted daily. By 7, I was in the studio downtown, lights flicking on row by row. Fresh canvases leaned against brick walls, eager as children at recess. A message waited on the computer. The City Youth Council had accepted my proposal for Coral Legacy, a small scholarship fund for students who loved art but feared tuition fees the way I once feared invoices. They asked if I would speak at a winter assembly 15 minutes on perseverance and budgeting. I laughed out loud, budgeting the lesson I paid so dearly to master, and replied yes before nerves could interfere. Afternoon brought bean and leaf steam curling from Leonora's espresso machine. She handed me a paper bag of cinnamon knots for the road and whispered that Mom's bakery orders were outselling her own pastries 3 mornings out of 5. Pride warmed her voice, not jealousy. I promised to pass the congratulations along. Snow began mid-conversation, thin flakes first, then dense, fluttering sheets that softened traffic into a hush. I closed the studio early, lugging the projector home to refine my assembly slideshow. At a stoplight, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as Fiona Kane, Regional Manager for a marketing conglomerate called Neon Frame. She praised Blue Current's murals, hinted at collaboration, then slid in the real pitch. Neon Frame wanted to acquire boutique design houses in mid-sized towns. "We leave owners in charge," she said. "You'd gain resources, payroll, health benefits for any staff." I answered politely that I wasn't selling, but thanked her for thinking of us. She countered with a vague 7-figure forecast. I ended the call before temptation stretched its claws. Home smelled of cedar and old paint. I spread design drafts on the living room floor, logos for a local beekeeper, a run club, the town library's centennial campaign, and reminded myself the fun lived in these corners, not in quarterly board meetings. Still, Neon Frame's dangling digits hovered at the edge of my thoughts. Over dinner, I phoned Yasmin. She laughed when I mentioned the offer. "If you want a raise, give yourself one," she said. "You're the boss." She was right. I increased my project rates 10% across the board, and typed a note charging fairly is not selfish. 2 days later, Dad walked into the studio wearing a stiff tie and an uncertain grin. He'd accepted a part-time position supervising safety compliance for a new construction firm and needed updated business cards with an eco-friendly theme. The request felt like a strange blossom of normalcy. We sat at a drafting table while he described the company's values. Transparency worker, empowerment smarter materials. He paused halfway, cleared his throat, and said, "If you'd laughed and thrown me out, I'd have deserved it." I kept sketching while answering. I prefer to invoice rather than throw. He nodded, shoulders settling. The cards turned out clean and confident. He paid full price with a check that carried none of the old hesitation. Later, he texted a photo of the finished batch, lined like soldiers beside his coffee cup. Mom replicated the image with cinnamon knots in perfect rows. Their pride bounced through every pixel. Blue Current's winter calendar filled quickly. The library mural would stretch 40 feet, swirling pioneer history into modern reading culture. A dive bar wanted neon-inspired chalk art. A tech startup 2 towns over asked for a full branding suite. I hired my first contractor, a shy illustrator named Mateo, who could charm life into any color palette. Health insurance suddenly mattered. I explored group plans and realized Neon Frame's benefits pitch wasn't kindness, but a market gap I could close myself. Eli's semester ended with 3 A's and 2 B's. He surprised me by driving to Willow Lane, alone car rattling, but determined to deliver a handmade thank you plaque, tiny coral-colored letters, carved into reclaimed wood. For believing, he said, and for letting me pay my own rent to life. We hung it in the studio above the light switch so every departure required a glance at hope. January thawed abruptly. Rain-hammered gutters' ice cracked apart, and sidewalks shimmered with slick puddles. On one stormy Friday, Leonora burst through the studio door, soaked to the elbows. A real estate brochure flapped in her hand. Bean and Leaf's landlord intended to sell the building. An out-of-town developer offering cash wanted to convert the block into high-end condos. Her lease had 6 months left renewal, uncertain. Fear traveled across her face in sharp lines. My gut clenched. That corner had cradled every turning point of the past year, epiphanies, budgets, reconciliations. I promised not to let it vanish under marble countertops no local could afford. That night, Megan and I pored over deed records. The seller was motivated, but refused partial deals. The cafe and 3 neighboring storefronts were bundled with 2 upper-floor apartments. Price steep, but not impossible if we structured a community co-op. I called a Saturday meeting with tenants, Leonora the barber, a vintage clothes curator, an elderly couple running the newsstand. We packed the cafe after closing steam, windowing every pane, while numbers danced on a whiteboard. I laid out an audacious plan: form Harbor Block Cooperative, crowdsource initial equity from ourselves, apply for a low-interest preservation grant, and leverage Blue Current's earnings as anchor capital. Silence followed, then slow nods, then a barber's joke about finally owning more than scissors. Vote unanimous. Next days blurred into spreadsheets and grant narratives. Trevor delivered sandwiches to fuel our sessions. Yasmin proofread applications between dental charts. Mateo designed the co-op logo free of charge. Eli built a rudimentary website highlighting each shop's history. Mom donated cinnamon knots for volunteer nights. Dad offered to oversee post-purchase safety upgrades. The bank demanded collateral. I offered Willow Lane. Signing the temporary lien felt terrifying, but right land had given me a life. Now it could protect the soil where I'd rebuilt. By April, paperwork stacked tall but tidy. We awaited grant approval, heartbeats in our throats. Neon Frames Fiona emailed again, this time attaching a formal acquisition contract with a deadline. I finally wrote back, Blue Current declines and recommends you watch how small towns protect their color. She didn't reply. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived from the State Arts and Culture Commission, the grant committee. I held it over the studio table while everyone crowded around. Fingers shook as I tore the seal. Full award granted. Celebration erupted, laughter, tears, the barber's scissors snipping air triumphantly. Harbor Block Cooperative closed escrow in June. Leonora signed her new lease, identical in rent but triple in security. The newsstand owners cried when I handed them an inclusive equity certificate. They now owned 3% of the block they'd opened papers in for 42 years. A local journalist covered the story. The headline read, "Small businesses buy their own future." Comments flooded social media. People needed proof that underdogs could learn the rules and still keep their souls. Summer lightning split the sky the night after the article, thunder echoing street to river. I stood on Willow Lane's porch counting seconds between flash and boom, thinking how storms illuminate in bursts the architecture we ignore in everyday glow. The same way crisis exposes systems, pushes us to craft sturdier ones. Marine A voice inside teased you're turning metaphors into habits. I smiled at the thought. Late July, the Coral Legacy Award ceremony unfolded in the high school gym. 15 kids in secondhand caps accepted scholarships worth enough to buy software canvases or welder's gloves, whatever creation demanded. I spoke exactly 14 minutes. The timer light blinked at the back of the room. I told them budgeting wasn't a cage. It was an oar. With it, they could steer through currents rather than drift. At the podium's edge, I spotted Eli recording Dad, clapping carefully, Mom pressing a tissue to her cheek. Afterwards, a student's grandmother hugged me so fiercely, my ribs complained and whispered, "You changed the current." That night, I pinned the event badge next to the old pink envelope, origin and outcome side by side. August heat painted the town in haze. Blue Current hired a second contractor. Bean and Leaf hosted slam poetry nights. The barber invested in upgraded chairs. The newsstand added a tiny lending library. The vintage curator launched an online shop. Cooperative meetings occasionally erupted into lively debate. How many festivals were too many, whether to repaint shared hallways, but each disagreement ended with raised hands holding coffee toasting progress. One sultry Sunday, I drove to the bluff overlooking the river, the same viewpoint where I once weighed ambition against rest. This time, I carried a legal pad titled 5-Year Vision. It listed studio expansion, a mentorship program, buying back Willow Lane's lien within 12 months, and scribbled in the margin, maybe a personal life that didn't fit only in time gaps. A memory surfaced of Trevor leaving a picnic early because deliveries called. A warmth followed. I scrawled coffee with Trevor, not about work, then underlined it twice. September's first chill arrived with a surprise email. Bean and Leaf had been nominated for a statewide Community Impact Award, thanks to the mural's role in revitalizing the district. They wanted me at the ceremony. Leonora wrote, "Wear something you don't mind cameras loving." I borrowed a sleek navy dress from Yasmin's newlywed sister, paired it with thrift store heels, scuffed but polished. The award dinner shimmered with chandeliers. When Leonora accepted the plaque, she split her speech between caffeine and courage, crediting the mural for transforming 4 brick walls into a heartbeat. Cameras flashed as she beckoned me on stage. Applause rolled like surf. For a moment, the past with its invoices and late fees felt miles beneath the surface, still there, but distant pressure equalized. Back in town, I walked the quiet cooperative block, under streetlights, whose glow we'd voted to keep warm white instead of corporate blue. A gust lifted fallen leaves in tiny spirals, and I thought this corner, these walls, this light paid for by people daring to believe rent isn't the only way to measure value. At Willow Lane, a letter waited from the bank. One last payment would clear the lien on my house. I laughed, soft, grateful, wrote the check, and flagged the envelope with a coral-colored sticker. Eli phoned the next evening. A regional scholarship wanted an interview. He asked if my old spreadsheet templates still existed. I emailed them alongside a proud big sister pep note. After hanging up, I watched dusk seep into the rooms I had once slept in on a mattress directly on floorboards. Now rugs cushioned each step, art-lined walls, kettles sang generous songs. No section of life felt owed to someone else. Every corner carried evidence of choice, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Neon Frame tried once more, sending a glossy booklet trumpeting expansion. I mailed it back with a single line hand-lettered across the cover, "We prefer local hues." The first snow of a new winter drifted down on cooperative roofs shining with fresh sealant. Inside Bean and Leaf cinnamon knots cooled on Rack's scent mingling with espresso and printed newspapers. In the studio, Mateo laid out next year's workshop calendar. I pinned the 5-year vision beside it. Tasks layered like brushstrokes, each adding depth. Out on Willow Lane, marigold seeds slept beneath soil, waiting for thaw the porch light, steady as a promise. And I realized I was no longer drafting escape routes. I was mapping gardens. The second winter in my own house settled like a quilt stitched from every earlier season fall, frost brushing the window edges, basil seeds sleeping in labeled paper packets, cooperative block glowing steady downtown, and blue currant invoices printing in neat columns while soup simmered on Willow Lane's stove. I cleared the lien on the property with a coral-stickered envelope that felt lighter than air, then spent the evening watching snow erase tire marks on the street outside, thinking how ownership is sometimes the absence of certain noises. No gears grinding in the mind about next month's risk. Only silence in which new ideas grow. One of those ideas was personal after half a dozen coffee dates that weren't dates with Trevor. I finally asked if he wanted to try dinner without cargo boxes waiting in his van. He laughed, said it had taken me long enough, and showed up carrying tulips and a nervous grin. We cooked pasta, talked about roots he might add when spring returned, and somewhere between stirring sauce and plating, we realized quiet comfort can be as electrifying as any auditorium applause. By January, our schedules overlapped like dovetailed joints. On mornings when my mural brushes were still drying, he left honey pastries from Mom's bakery on the porch, and I redesigned his delivery logo into a crest shaped like a compass pointing toward home. Meanwhile, Coral Legacy's first cohort sent postcards from freshman dorms, charcoal sketches taped above beanbag chairs, 3D printed gears for engineering prototypes, one welding mask decorated with little coral waves. Each message was a tiny lighthouse, signaling proof that a seed fund can multiply in other people's hands. The City Youth Council asked if I would expand the scholarships to include entrepreneurship. I drafted a plan that funneled a slice of Blue Currant profits plus a voluntary percentage from each cooperative member's monthly revenue. The vote passed in one evening with more cheers than debate. Life felt so balanced, I almost expected the universe to tap the glass. It did, though, not in the way creditors once had. In late February, a freak warm front collided with a frozen river. Ice jams burst, water surged, and downtown streets turned into shin-deep currents, carrying stray coffee lids and bits of cardboard. The cooperative block stood on slightly higher ground, but the basement of Leonora's cafe took on water fast. I raced there beside Trevor and Mateo. Dad arrived wearing his safety supervisor vest. Eli drove in from campus with extra pumps borrowed from facilities. For 48 muddy, sandbag-stacking hours, we learned that saving a foundation often feels like saving a collective heartbeat. When the water receded, it left silt-warped floorboards and the dank smell of failure trying to take root. But nobody let it. We mopped, bleached, and dehumidified until the espresso machine hissed back to life. Insurance covered part of the loss. The emergency fund we had insisted on while writing the co-op bylaws covered the rest. Neon Frame noticed the flood too. Fiona resurfaced in my inbox, praising our resilience, while implying that flood-prone property might be safer under a firm with deep capital reserves. Her offer now dangled extra zeros and promised structural retrofits we couldn't yet afford. For a night, her proposal haunted my sleep, slipping under doors like leftover river water. But next morning, Mateo brought blueberry scones he'd baked himself to thank everyone for saving his storefront portfolio, and Leonora taped a hand-painted thank you sign over the newly dried doorway. Neon Frame's zeros suddenly looked pale beside handwritten gratitude. I drafted a response that declined purchase, then CC'd every cooperative owner so they would see the attempt and know the answer. The block stayed intact, both physically and philosophically. Spring thaw followed the flood almost apologetically, and with it came grant paperwork for rooftop solar. Yasmin's dentist boss agreed to sponsor a percentage if we would host free dental care pop-ups in the newsstand's side alley during summer markets. We mapped out panels vents and event tents while sap dripped from maples overhead. Trevor and I found time to hike the ridge trail where I once balanced ambition and rest. At the overlook, he slipped his hand into mine, said nothing, and the silence contained more commitment than any speech. Blue Currant landed its first regional museum contract, a traveling exhibit branding package, complete with floor graphics, VR intro, and a 12-meter banner. I hired a motion graphics student from the scholarship cohort as a paid intern circle close seed-grown fruit bearing new seeds. Workdays blurred into a satisfying hum, Until one morning, the bank called Neon Frame had attempted to buy the cooperative's loan. Our joint mortgage required unanimous approval for transfer. We'd structured that clause deliberately, yet the audacity rattled me. I convened an emergency meeting in the cafe, steam rising from cups like visible resolve. Eli presented a quick forensic analysis. Neon Frame's parent company often leveraged disasters buying mortgages when communities felt cornered. We weren't cornered, but needed to prove it. In 48 hours, Mateo finished a publicity poster, Mom's Bakery prepped catering, Dad scheduled a safety demo, and Trevor organized free deliveries for anyone purchasing downtown that weekend. We branded it the Higher Ground Festival, a tongue-in-cheek nod to flood elevation lines. Social media exploded. Street musicians volunteered. Even the mayor's office shared the flyer. Saturday dawned bright. Foot traffic quadrupled, sales soared. Grant officers toured and nodded. Neon Frame's tactic dissolved under the weight of proof that revenue like water can rise when people pour in. Month-end financials displayed record highs. Bank officers thanked us for making their due diligence look heroic. Summer compressed weeks into lightning bugs and late sunsets. The library mural unveiled to brass band fanfare. Kids traced stories along painted scrolls, and adults snapped photos that turned hashtags into free marketing. Choral Legacy scholarships doubled. We added a trades track, so not every artist felt pressure to stay academic. Dad hosted safety workshops there, discovering a teacher's patience he never knew he had. Mom experimented with gluten-free cinnamon knots. They sold out before noon. I realized my family's kitchen conversations now revolved around forecasts and innovations rather than excuses. One July night, I found Eli on Willow Lane's porch scribbling formulas on a legal pad. He admitted he wanted to intern with Blue Current's accounting next semester. Pride and disbelief tangled inside me. I told him we'd draft a fair contract, nothing familial about it, and his smile said that was exactly the point. Progress can be addictive. September brought hints of burnout. I woke one morning, unable to recall the last day off. Trevor noticed first. He left a note on my desk, even gardens need fallow time. I scheduled a 3-day weekend shut-off email and camped beside the river with a sketchbook, letting the empty pages remind me that space is creative too. When I returned, the studio looked different. Mateo had rearranged plants to catch better light. Eli had color-coded expense binders, and my absence had not collapsed anything. The realization loosened a knot I didn't know I still carried. October arrived with crisp mornings and the first coral-hued leaves drifting onto the porch roof. I launched a series of free Friday workshops for young creators teaching Adobe Basics in the morning and budgeting in the afternoon. The waiting list reached winter before Halloween. At Bean and Leaf, Leonora framed the original mural sketch and hung it near the counter. A tourist asked if prints were available. We printed 50, they sold in a week. Revenue funded another rooftop panel. A local podcast invited me to talk about building anti-fragile communities. I spoke of invoices and late fees of quiet banks of the power of receipts to become roadmaps. Listeners mailed thank you letters, some typed, some hand-drawn one, sewn into fabric, like a quilt square. Each envelope reminded me that storytelling is also infrastructure. November's first snow caught marigolds still blooming by the porch. They bent under white lace but did not break. I clipped a few, pressed them into my sketchbook beside the pink envelope relic. Strange how symbols can shift what once screamed debt, now whispered distance traveled, and what once felt fragile, now flexed in cold wind, unafraid. The year edged toward solstice. Cooperative windows filled with handcrafted ornaments painted by workshop students. Blue Current shipped its museum banners. Trevor's business added 2 drivers. Eli submitted his transfer application with spreadsheets tidy and grammar tight. On Willow Lane, I turned off the porch light and counted stars more visible. Every winter, as the town swapped old street lamps for dark sky models, financed by a grant the cooperative helped write. The sky's quiet echoed the hush I'd heard that first frost morning, but now it sounded like a deep breath before a longer story, the kind told around fires when everyone contributes a thread. I realized part 6 of my life would arrive whether I outlined it or not, and outlining felt like a promise to myself, so I opened a fresh page and wrote 3 intentions. Keep the river at bay, but the currents alive, teach without preaching, and love without invoices. Outside snow hushed the town. Inside the kettle began to sing. Winter sighed itself out in fine crystal powder. And by late February, sunlight had learned to linger on Willow Lane a few minutes past dinner, long enough for Trevor and me to sip tea on the porch swing and count how many basil seedlings dared push through trays in the kitchen. The cooperative block thawed too. Ice dripped from awnings onto sidewalks where new mural colors waited beneath tarps for warmer hands. One afternoon, I met Matteo on the library roof to inspect solar panel inverters humming like improv jazz. He pointed to the horizon where cranes pierced the skyline, proof that developers still circled, but our rooftops shone, feeding clean current into every socket below. At Blue Current, the museum contract blossomed into an encore. A traveling science exhibit needed interactive wayfinding. I hired a second intern, a ceramics major, who animated clay objects frame by frame until they danced across screens. Delegating felt less like letting go and more like opening windows. Fresh air carried ideas I wouldn't have scripted. March arrived with a letter from the State Commerce Office. Harbor Block Cooperative had been nominated for a Rural Innovation Award. Eligibility required a 3-year financial review. We had records, but perfecting them became Eli's capstone internship. He turned spreadsheets into art charts, rising like sunbeams, expenses analyzed with footnotes gentler than any professor's red pen. Dad reviewed safety compliance logs, Mom ensured bakery receipts matched inventory, and by the deadline, our submission read like a symphony of balanced ledgers. 2 weeks later, we learned we'd made the final round. A judging team would tour in May. Pressure with purpose can sharpen vision. I refurbished the studio facade, swapping peeling teal for a deep coral gradient that bled into sunrise gold. Leonora replaced bistro tables with reclaimed oak benches, etched by local woodworkers. The barber installed vintage mirrors that made everyone look like a movie still. Even the newsstand couple added a modest espresso window for commuters. We weren't polishing for judges. We were claiming identity layer by layer. April's only hiccup came from neon frame. Fiona, politely relentless, mailed thick packets describing a partnership model rather than acquisition. But buried on page 19 sat a clause transferring creative control after 2 fiscal quarters. I delivered the packet to a Friday workshop, invited students to highlight propaganda in neon markers, then mailed the graffiti-bright document back with a thank you for the teaching aid. Silence followed. May bloomed lilac in anticipation. The judging team, 3 officials and 1 economist, arrived on a cloudless Thursday, clipboards ready. We walked block to block, cafe to studio, barbershop to library mural, rooftop to storefront. Kids from my workshop performed a pop-up projection show on the newsstand wall, tracing Harbor Block's history in swirling animations. Judges asked about flood mitigation. Matteo displayed festival revenue figures. Eli outlined emergency reserves. Leonora served cinnamon knot samples still warm. When dusk draped the street in amber, I closed with a single sentence. We didn't wait for outside investment to rescue us. We invested in each other until rescue was unnecessary. Results would come in July. While we waited, life continued its quiet braiding. Trevor proposed a combined delivery and design van wrap, half compass, half paint swirl. The project turned into a date night sketch jam that ended with him asking casual, but eyes shining, if I'd consider moving some of my brushes to his place, or vice versa. I laughed, said I already stole half his fridge space with iced coffee jars, and maybe we should buy a bigger fridge before a bigger house. Commitment, like budgeting, can be broken into manageable installments. June delivered heat and a tangible restlessness among Coral Legacy students back for summer break. I piloted a make and repair clinic mornings, spent painting city benches, afternoons documenting costs and ROI. Dad taught safety harness basics. Mom kept everyone sugared and hydrated. One bench, revived under wild gradient colors, attracted local press. The mayor commissioned 20 more. Proof again, creativity married to math gets invited to dance. Mid-July, thunder rolled in with the award announcement. Harbor Block Cooperative won first place, along with a grant earmarked for community resiliency projects. The block erupted horns, honked espresso. Steam shears snipped celebratory confetti from old magazines. We pledged the funds toward a green roof garden system to capture stormwater and grow herbs for cafe specials. I felt relief not of victory over others, but validation that the math of kindness could outperform pure profit. August heatwave tested roofs and tempers. Green roof installation halted when supply chains snarled. Tempers frayed in planning meetings. I remembered burnout's shadow and called a pause 2 nights of block-wide potlucks. No agenda, just shade iced tea and music from a busker paid in leftover pastries. By the second night, arguments melted, volunteers restacked soil rolls, and work resumed at dawn with renewed patience. Lesson retaught rest is infrastructure. Early September, I visited my parents' apartment and noticed an escrow flyer on their table. After 2 stable years, they qualified to purchase a modest condo. Mom traced countertops in the brochure, awestruck that numbers could align without secret subsidies. Dad joked he finally understood amortization thanks to Eli's spreadsheets. Pride glowed but didn't blind. They'd learned to anchor dreams in arithmetic, a language I once feared hearing from their mouths. Back at Willow Lane, marigolds surged gold again, porch lights still steady. Trevor kneeled one twilight, holding a small cedar box he'd carved during slow delivery hours. Inside lay a ring shaped like 2 interlocking brush strokes. He didn't ask a question. Words felt redundant. I said yes, of course, in a voice that surprised me with its calm certainty. We celebrated under the porch swing while basil scent drifted from open windows. Wedding talk fluttered into studio chatter. Yet we resolved to host a celebration that echoed every value, forged potluck dishes from each cooperative member. Music by scholarship students, decor upcycled from mural tarps. Date chosen next spring equinox when light equals dark and metaphors write themselves. October's brisk air carried whispers of new challenges. Regional zoning plans threatened tax hikes on mixed-use properties. Rather than panic, we formed a delegation, Eli, Leonora, Mateo, myself, to attend town hall hearings armed with data on community economic impact. We spoke calm numbers, told vivid stories, and by December, amendments emerged granting co-ops reduced rates. The vote margin was slim. The lesson, vast vigilance, is the price of self-direction. Bluecurrent closed the year with its highest revenue yet, and a waiting list until summer. I implemented a 4-day creative week to protect mental soil switching, Fridays to administrative sprint only. Productivity rose, laughter rose with it. Even Fiona might approve of such metrics, though she'd have charged for the consult. Winter returned third one since the guillotine envelope, but its voice sounded different, stillness not threat. Snow fell. Cooperative lights shimmered. The green roof slept under white insulation, ready to drink thaw. I brewed tea, opened the old sketchbook, traced a fingertip over that pink rectangle of origin. It had faded near edges, color bleeding into paper grain, like memory dissolving into narrative. I considered removing it, decided against. Stories need anchors lest triumph drift into complacency. A week before solstice, Coral Legacy applicants waited on notifications. Reviewing portfolios, I saw echoes of my younger self, raw passion, shaky finances, giant dreams. I approved grants for a filmmaker with a borrowed camera, a coder rewriting language learning apps for refugees, a car-obsessed teen planning to 3D print adaptive pedals for drivers with prosthetics. Each award email ended with the same line, budgeting is an or row where you choose. Snow deepened. Trevor and I drafted wedding invitations shaped like compass petals. Mateo hand-lettered them. Mom baked sample knot cakes twined in coral sugar. Dad offered to string solar fairy lights borrowed from the library rooftop stock. Eli designed a RSVP portal linking to rideshare spreadsheets, because of course he did. On New Year's Eve, we gathered at Bean and Leaf, now simply called the Block Cafe after a rebrand Mateo led. Champagne glasses clinked at midnight. Fireworks salted the sky. I stood between parents and fiancé, between interns and veterans, and realized my pulse matched the faint vibration of solar inverters atop rooftops. Quiet energy constant, converted from one form to another without loss. A final thought rose as the year tipped into the next. Invoices can imprison, but they can also become blueprints. Late fees can crush, but they can also finance the buyback of power. Rent can drain, but it can also teach value if we decide the lesson belongs to us, not to the ones who first tried to teach it wrong. I closed my eyes, thanked the darkness for contrast, thanked the light for persistence, and thanked myself for keeping every receipt until the balance sheet spelled freedom. Outside, the town clock rang 12 times. Inside, cinnamon knots cooled on parchment. And somewhere in an art school dorm, a scholarship student sketched a future whose outlines would inevitably touch ours.